The blast doors of the Kaelith Dominion's flagship, the Vorn Ascendant, buckled inward with a shriek of tortured metal. Commander Issa, Threll, pressed her back against the corridor wall, 3 of her soldiers bleeding out beside her, and stared at the single figure walking through the smoke. He wasn't running. He wasn't even hurrying. One human. Unarmored except for a torn flight suit, blood soaking through a wound in his side that should have dropped him a mile back, and still walking forward, step after measured step, like the ship's collapsing hull meant nothing at all. Take the shot. Issa hissed to her last soldier. The soldier didn't move. He was staring too. Not at the man's wounds. At his eyes. That's not adrenaline, the soldier whispered. That's patience. Behind them, painted across the ancient bulkhead in a language older than the Dominion itself, was a warning their ancestors had carved into the hull of every capital ship for 600 years. When they stop retreating, it is already over. None of them had understood what it meant. They were about to. 6 days earlier, the Kaelith Dominion had ruled 11 star systems for over 1,000 years, and in all that time they had never lost a war. Their fleets were disciplined. Their weapons were elegant. Their strategists were the finest the galaxy had produced, and buried in the deepest archives of their homeworld, sealed behind 3 layers of encryption even their own historians rarely accessed, sat a warning file Lazination, human. 3 Protocol. Do not engage until retreat. Grand Marshal Doran Vex had read it once as a cadet and dismissed it as superstition. Old fear dressed up as strategy. The file was 6 centuries old, written after a single skirmish with a species the Dominion had never encountered since. No name, no empire, no fleet, just a warning and no explanation. So when Dominion scout ships detected an unshielded human colony vessel drifting near the mineral-rich rimworld of Chaos 9, Vex didn't hesitate. The vessel was slow, poorly armed, and carrying what his sensors read as civilians. An easy prize. A show of strength for a Dominion that hadn't tested its claws in decades. He gave the order to board. He had no idea he'd just triggered something his ancestors spent 600 years trying to prevent. The boarding was supposed to take 20 minutes. Dominion Marines cut through the colony ship's outer hull, expecting panic, expecting surrender, expecting the easy compliance every other species in known space eventually offered when faced with Kaelith firepower. Instead, they found calm. A woman in a maintenance jumpsuit looked up from a console, glanced at the 12 armed soldiers pouring through the breach, and said something into her comm that translated roughly to, "They're early, wake the others." Then she went back to typing. The lead Marine, confused by the lack of fear, ordered her restrained. She didn't resist. She simply asked, almost gently, "Are you sure this is the ship you want to be on right now?" Nobody understood what she meant. Not yet. 3 decks below, Dominion soldiers discovered something that made Marshal Vex's blood run cold when the report reached him. The civilian colony ship had weapons bays, old, unfamiliar, deliberately hidden weapons bays. Not primed, not active, just waiting. This wasn't a defenseless vessel that had wandered into Dominion space. It was bait. Vex ordered immediate withdrawal the moment the weapons bays were confirmed. Whatever this ship was, it wasn't worth the risk of an unknown engagement so far from Dominion support lines. But withdrawal orders take time to execute. And in that window, something arrived that no scanner had detected coming. A human warship, unmarked, dark-hulled, sliding out of what Dominion sensors registered as impossible stealth geometry, dropped out of nowhere directly between the Vorn Ascendant and its escape route. No hail. No demand for surrender. No warning shot, just a single transmission, spoken calmly by a voice that would later be identified as Captain Mara Isande. "You boarded a ship full of our people. We're not asking for it back nicely." The Dominion had just made the worst mistake in 600 years, and they were only beginning to realize it. What followed wasn't a battle. Marshal Vex would later struggle to describe it as one in his official report, because battles implied uncertainty. This had none. The human ship didn't overpower the Vorn Ascendant with superior firepower. Dominion sensors confirmed the vessel was, technically, weaker in raw output. What it had instead was precision. Every strike landed exactly where Dominion shields were thinnest. Every maneuver anticipated a Dominion countermove, 3 seconds before it happened. "They're not guessing," the Vorn Ascendant's tactical officer said, voice shaking. "They're reading us." That wasn't paranoia. It was true. Human decryption teams had spent the entire boarding sequence, while their colonists calmly stalled Dominion Marines with idle conversation, quietly harvesting the Dominion's tactical communication protocols. The civilians hadn't been hostages. They'd been the trap's teeth. By the time Marshal Vex understood this, half his shield array was gone, and Captain Isande's boarding teams were already cutting through his own ship's corridors. This is where Issa Threll found herself, pinned in a smoke-filled corridor, watching a wounded, unarmored human named Corporal Elias Wren walk toward her position without a shred of urgency. She would learn his name later, during the ceasefire negotiations. In this moment, she only knew what she saw: a soldier who had been shot twice, who had lost half his boarding squad, and who was still moving forward like the outcome was already decided. "Why isn't he retreating?" her soldier whispered again. Because that was the thing the ancient warning had tried to explain and failed to put into words. Humans didn't fight like the Dominion's other rivals. They didn't calculate the odds and pull back when the numbers turned unfavorable. Somewhere in 600 years of quiet history, human military doctrine had settled on something disturbingly simple: protect your people first, win second, and never, ever leave a wounded soldier behind to negotiate for you. Elias Wren wasn't advancing because he thought he'd win. He was advancing because 3 of his squadmates were trapped 2 decks up, and going back wasn't an option his training even considered. That was the secret the warning had tried to preserve, and the Dominion had just relearned it the hard way. Marshal Vex surrendered 11 minutes later, not because his ship was beaten, but because Captain Isande gave him something the Dominion rarely offered its own defeated enemies: a way out that didn't require humiliation. "Return our people. Withdraw from KS9. We're done here," she said over open comm, her voice steady but not cruel. "You made a mistake. Most species do the first time. Don't make a second one." Vex, staring at the wreckage of his tactical display, finally understood what the ancient file had been trying to tell his ancestors for 6 centuries. It wasn't a warning about human strength. It was a warning about human restraint. And what happened the moment that restraint ran out? He gave the order to stand down. Weeks later, as the Dominion's ambassadors sat across the table from human representatives, for the first real diplomatic exchange between the 2 powers, Vex asked Isande a question that had haunted him since the battle. "Your people were badly outnumbered. Outgunned, even by your own admission. Why weren't you afraid?" Isande considered the question for a long moment before answering. "We were afraid," she said. "We're always afraid. That's not the part that matters. The part that matters is what you do with the fear, whether it makes you smaller, or whether it makes you show up anyway." She paused, glancing at the old warning file the Dominion had finally declassified and shared, almost as an apology. "That file your ancestors wrote," she said. "They didn't get it wrong. They just never figured out how to explain it to people who'd never had to fight for something they truly couldn't afford to lose." Vex said nothing. There was nothing left to argue. 600 years of quiet respect, carved into a warning nobody had understood, until a colony ship full of ordinary people and 1 wounded corporal who refused to stop walking finally made it clear. The Dominion had spent centuries preparing for human strength. They had never once prepared for human loyalty. And in the end, that was the only warning that had ever truly mattered.